So thanks for tuning in to our second episode of the podcast. You might notice that your co-hosts have changed slightly in the meantime, and we've rebranded our name Between Two Beards, hence Two Beards. So we're going to change up the format just slightly, and we're going to introduce ourselves, and then we'll get into today's episode, which is why we do what we do. If you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. So I'm sure there's a lot of just burning curiosity to know who I am and my origin story. And I'll try to be brief, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I guess my story started back in the late 1900s when I enlisted between junior and senior year of high school into the Marines. And for me, it was not necessarily a only option thing like you hear a lot of people talk about when they're joining the Marines, specifically the infantry. It was I knew I wasn't ready for college thing, and had other things that I needed to do first and sow the royal oats, so to speak. So I depped in somewhere between junior and senior year, shipped out about 3 days after walking the stage for high school, and that's where everything began. So from there, did my first term, got out about April 2001, and then the thing happened later in that year, so I ended up trying to go back because IRR, Inactive Ready Reserve, was starting to get called up. And so I'd looked at changing, I guess you could call it, careers within the military. And so I started talking to the Army about going to become a 13F, which is an artillery forward observer. And so that's what I ended up doing in early, I would say, 22, and served out about a year and a half doing that. Went to the school, got assigned to a division artillery unit, where I was definitely not dropping bullets on anything. I was watching everything happen on a screen inside of an air-conditioned trailer and realized that that's not what I wanted to do. And so I decided that I was going to get out and go to college. So I got out, went to college. We'll get into that experience here in a little bit. But that started my path to becoming where I am today. So today I'm Senior Director for Veteran and Military Affairs at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And I know that sounds very uninteresting, but what I'm hoping is by the time we get to the end of this particular episode, you're going to get a much better idea of why we do what we do and where we intend to go with this.
So, my name is Will Lanston. I am the Senior Program Manager here for Veteran and Military Affairs at University of Texas at San Antonio. My story started in the trailer parks of North Florida in the swamps of the middle of nowhere. I joined the Army in 2002. I also depped in. Didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, just knew I wasn't going to go to college, and I joined the Army to get out of my small town. I did not pick my job, so I'm our resident pogue here in the office as a 92 Alpha supply clerk. I was basically the AutoZone guy for the motor pool for 4 years over in Wiesbaden, Germany, and ended up marrying the first sergeant's daughter and chased her to Texas, and that's how I ended up in San Antonio, and had the most cliche transitioning experience that you could probably have as a veteran. So if there is a bad choice you can make to include marrying the first sergeant's daughter and getting out of the military, I made it, which is why I ended up here. Started out as a student, had no intentions of joining higher ed, but something we say a lot here. I found purpose in serving, continuing to serve my fellow veterans, and just kind of landed this position when I started out here as a student worker.
You know, what's funny is we often talk about those bad decisions, and that's not just something that we banter about with each other. That actually came up in my job interview for this particular position. I got asked a question that I think is impossible to answer in most cases, which is, why should we pick you over the other candidates for this role? And my answer essentially said, because I've made every mistake and gone through every trial and hit every barrier that the majority of veterans transitioning to college are going to face. So it makes sense to bring somebody in who can relate authentically versus maybe somebody who would come in and mansplain or vetsplain the transition to vets. So it's something that we talk about, but it's also something that we live every day.
That was pretty much my entire interview when I sat down with Lisa and Micah and Elisa and was like, here's all the ways that I messed up and how I can help you by helping other veterans not make the same mistakes that I made. And it must have resonated with them because I've been here not going on 9 years now.
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge for me after I got out of the military was two things. One, the lack of structure and the lack of community. And the other was me not knowing who I was or what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I was kind of rudderless, and I got out of the Army. I went to school because that's what you do as a veteran. You got your GI Bill, you go to school. And so I started out as an education major because at no point during my deployment to Iraq or anything had I ever sat down and said, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I didn't put a whole lot of thought into it. So when I just showed up here, I was like, well, my mom was a school teacher. I'll go be a school teacher. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. It didn't resonate with me. So I did the other thing that veterans do, and I started doing a major in business management because I was like, I can tell other people what to do, but it wasn't because it's what I wanted to do. And after I started working here, I was like, oh, I really like this. I enjoy the case management part of this. I love the programming part of this. So I started switch over to psychology because that actually fit more to what we were doing here and helped me understand what I was going through, but also what other veterans are going through. And so that's probably the most impactful thing that I did as a student.
So my struggle with transition was I feel like this is probably typical, but not very well talked about, and it's a phenomenon that we run into, and we won't get into the examples of that today. But coming out of the environment that I had been in, where high structure, a lot of authority, very vertical hierarchy, I guess I existentially backlashed. I didn't want to deal with people. I didn't want to deal with authority. I didn't want to deal with chains of command. So my first several years of jobs after transitioning out were graveyard shift because that was the one that dealt with the least amount of people, and I never saw management and didn't have to worry about even traffic, which was a problem for me at the time. So I didn't do myself any favors by not being intentional trying to help myself transition. In fact, I did the opposite, trying to isolate myself from all of the things that I needed to be reintegrating into. And so I feel like that kind of delayed things for me, maybe a couple of years. But same thing, get out, and they tell you go use your GI Bill. That's what you're supposed to do. That's why you were here in the first place. It's true for some of them, maybe not for the two of us. But my challenge with trying to get to school was, and I'll walk you through it. I showed up to a campus, and I didn't know anything about anything. And I walked into the first building I could find, and I said, hey, I'm here to use my GI Bill. And the person in there said, you need to go talk to freshman advising. So I find my way over to freshman advising, and I say, hey, I'm here to figure out how to use my GI Bill to be a student. They said, hey, are you already admitted? I said, no, I'm not. Well, we only work with admitted students, so you need to go talk to the VA people, is what they said. And they gave me the room number for this, which took me probably over an hour to navigate to, right? And I'm accomplished with land navigation, and it still took me that long to figure out this building. And so they had the VA office, as they called it, stuffed kind of into the back 40, into a closet in a corner of a third floor area. And I walk in, and I used the wrong word. I said, I'd like to talk to a counselor about using my GI Bill benefits. And the response I got from the person at the front desk was, you have to go to the VA hospital for mental health counseling. We don't do that here. So at that point, I was pretty upset. I'd been at this for a few hours and had been walking around and decided, I'm done. I'm going to go home. So I go and I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot, and I'm thinking, this is the universe telling me that school's not for me. And as soon as those words left my mouth, I got angry and thought, how many other people like me were sitting maybe in this exact same parking spot in their car, thought that same thought, and then just went home. And that's when I think the very first flicker of my sense of purpose hit me, which is somebody should do something about this. And then what every private says, if I ran this place, I could do it better than the people that are doing it right now. And then what I ended up doing to get into school, right, not to get too far off track, is I went to the local community college. I walked in, asked the same question, but the answer I got was, go to this building, go to this room number. You're going to see a giant arrow hanging from the ceiling that says start here. And so I did that. I walked in. They handed me a checklist to get admitted and a catalog. And that's exactly what I need. I think that's exactly what people in our situation need. That's where we're coming from. We need a checklist. We need a catalog. And that was the beginning of my higher ed journey. But I know that you're gonna have something to add on to the end of this. That doesn't mean that was the beginning of my success, because I did get into college and ended up getting kicked out after the first year for low GPA, because as long as those GI Bill checks were clearing, I thought, well, then they don't have a problem with me not going to class or doing anything. And at the time, I didn't realize they only do academic reviews once a year, so I got away with it for 2 semesters. 2 full semesters, 12-hour course load, so 24 semester credit hours of F. And then I get this letter that says, you're cordially invited to sit out, because clearly this isn't working for you, so figure it out before you try to come back. Which I did, and I eventually did come back and realized that I did have to take it seriously, and that I did have to have goals and an intrinsic drive, and it wasn't just about collecting the GI Bill check every month.
I think for me, because I started out at the Alamo colleges instead of the 4-year college, because I knew that I wasn't ready. I thought the 4-year school was too big. There's too many people there. That's not for me. So I started out at Vista, and I think my start was probably a little bit better than yours. Of course, being a Marine, the arrow that said start here was probably good for you.
It was.
But I learned very quickly that I really struggled with the transition, because I tried to hold on to the culture of what we did in the military and the way we talked to people and things like that too strongly. And I remember getting into a heated debate with a fellow student in my AIS class because I felt I was right and she was wrong, and I wasn't seeing it from her perspective. And then I said some things that probably got me flagged by conduct, and the teacher pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, luckily she was the spouse of a military person. She was like, you're not in the military anymore. You can't talk to people like that." And of course, I was young, so I thought I knew everything, and was like, "What do you know, old lady?" Well, the school seemed to agree, because after a couple semesters of me not getting good grades, I was also politely asked to sit out for a year from the Alamo colleges, just because my grades weren't there, my attitude wasn't there. But for me, that was that point of dissonance that I was like, no, I need to take control of my situation. I need to start making better choices, and I needed to take ownership of my transition from the military, and that's where it kind of started for me there.
Well, I'm glad you said dissonance, because when I tried to come back and they made me take a class about how to be a college student, because clearly if you've been kicked out, they think you need to know how to do that. And I remember that was probably the first time in college that I felt imposter syndrome. And it was because all of the other people in that class who had also been invited to sit out, they all had what I thought was very legitimate reasons. So one person said I had to battle addiction and I needed to get past that to focus on school. Another one had said I was in an abusive domestic situation, and so that kind of derailed my studies. And then it was my turn to talk, and I said, I just didn't show up to class and do the work. I just didn't do it. And I felt like, all these people have legitimate reasons and barriers, and mine was me. And so there was nothing I could blame. There was no external force that I could point at to say, here's why I'm not doing well. It was my fault. It was me. I just didn't do it. And that was, like you said, that was kind of the moment where I realized, okay, so if I need to take this seriously, and I need to handle business, because it's not going to get handled for me.
See, and I wanted to blame everybody else. I wanted it to be everybody's fault, because that was easier for me than to say, I'm the problem. Yeah. And so that's where I had to reach that point of dissonance where I was like, okay, what am I doing wrong here? And then I had to change my behavior, because my grades weren't there either. I didn't know who I wanted to be when I grew up. Yep. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was just going through the motions, and I didn't feel any sort of conviction for a while I was there, which then translated to me just not putting in the effort that I should have. And so I really had to start taking accountability for my own choices and stop blaming everybody else. But that was younger Will. I was 23 at the time, so of course I thought I knew everything but didn't know anything. And I wasn't working on me. And I think one of the other things that we talk about here a lot is that it's more than just academics. It wasn't me transitioning culturally. It wasn't me going and asking for help at the VA. I wasn't dealing with the things after my deployment and going through treatment or anything. So I was just angry, looking for somebody else to blame, and not taking it seriously.
Well, I think I tried treatment. I went to a single therapy session, and about 10 minutes into it, the therapist says, "Hey, you need to acknowledge that you're not in the Marines anymore." And I kind of looked at her for a second, and I was thinking this to myself. I don't need you to tell me that. That's why I'm here, because I'm not there, and it's causing all these problems. And what I actually did was I just stood up, said thanks for your time, and walked out. And I didn't seek any kind of care of any kind, physical, mental, anything, for probably the next 16 years.
You mean you weren't magically fixed after one partial appointment?
After being told I wasn't in the Marines anymore, yeah, that was not the magic key. But again, that just goes back to being my own worst enemy, because that triggered me to the point where I just didn't want to deal with any kind of intervention of any kind, again, including both physical and mental, for 16 years after that.
But I think that's a good point, because even here in our capacity of what we do in our professional lives, we talk about academics a lot. We talk about all things, but I think what we've done well here as a department is we've looked at the external stuff and said that success as a student is bigger than just going to class. It's bigger than just being path dependent and getting the degree. That we've brought in resources to be able to help our fellow veterans with their health, mental and physical, with finances, with transition, with moving beyond the TAPS briefings of transition. And I think that one of the things that's made us so successful in what we do, and not to sound too braggadocious, is that we take a comprehensive approach to supporting veterans, and not just the sexy things that people want to talk about a lot.
Right.
So I think balance is important, and something that I think we both agree that we did not do.
Right.
And so as we were students, both of us were married, both of us had children, and so our balance was, we're going to give 100% to everybody else and nothing to ourselves.
I'm gonna qualify before we go down this road too far that we still don't balance those things. So we're about to talk about how badly we handled that.
But this is a do as we say, not as we do situation.
Yeah, we still haven't mastered that, and we're still are not good examples of how to do that.
As we're texting each other at 10 o'clock at night about work stuff. So
what we say here, again, as Will said, do as we say, not as we do. Please don't follow our example.
Well, we're trying to, if nothing else, this podcast, I hope, is going to be the shining example of what not to do or how not to transition. And so learn from our mistakes, and hopefully somebody out there watching this, it'll resonate with them and go, that's me, I'm doing that. And so they can learn from the wisdom of our experience and our mistakes. So how did you, as a student, how did you balance those things?
I didn't. So I worked full time. The whole time I was in school, from the very beginning all the way through final graduation, I had a full-time job. And I was taking, as an undergraduate, roughly a 3/4 load, so 9 hours a semester. So I would work 8 to 5, and then I was in class 5:30 to 8:30, 3 days a week. And then, Saturday morning, get up, go coach kids basketball team. The one night that I wasn't in class, I was coaching practice. And then somewhere in there, figuring out how to do the stuff I'm supposed to do around the house, cut the yard, maintain the vehicles, study, do my homework. What I blame for that, clearly it was me not intentionally protecting self-care, even sleep. Like, I didn't really sleep. Still don't really sleep.
What's that?
But part of it is something that we brought forward culturally, because in some of our operations, op tempos, and I'm not just talking about deployment frequency, there's not okay, it's nighttime, so we cease operations. Like, when you're out there and you're doing stuff, it's 24/7, and you just almost develop this capability of being able to run in inhuman ways, and that's not a good thing. It just is what it is, and then we bring that forward, and then when we find a very strong sense of purpose out here, I just feel like we fall into old habits where back then it was, if I don't do this, there's going to be some very dire consequences to include life or death. Now out here it's not life or death, um, but when you have that kind of relationship, I think with your purpose, you just bring that forward, and it's just kind of who you are now. And so even though I've tried to do things to get more intentional and train my brain to turn off at night and things like that, I would have to assign that maybe a 30% success rate, and I don't know that I'm ever going to get better at that. But the difference now is that I'm doing things that I can see direct impacts for, versus back then being kind of a cog in a wheel where you don't really get to see the impact of it, but you know it's important.
Well, I think for me, when I first started out, one of the things that I struggled with is that, rather consciously or not, I said if I throw myself 1,000% into whatever I'm doing, then I don't have time to think about what I'm not doing. So if I filled all my time with the kids, with my spouse, with work, stuff like that, then I wasn't having to think about me and what I wasn't doing to transition to take care of myself. And so I was using it as an avoidant behavior. But now that I'm here and I'm doing what I'm doing now, it's less avoidant and more I just don't have time, because like you said, I see the impact that we're having, I see the success that we're having, the lives that we're changing, and that's such a powerful driver to keep doing what we're doing. Because I think that part of it is, like we say all the time, as our purpose statement, we want to be the level of support that we wish we had had.
Yeah.
And I see these other veterans coming here, and I remember showing up to the office for the first time and going, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody's thinking about me or what I'm going through. And I kind of see that with every veteran or family member that walks through this door. I don't want them to feel the way that I did.
Right.
And so I feel like I got to give 1,000% to make sure that there's no young Will walking through that front door, or young Mike that says, screw it, I want to give up.
I'm going home.
You know, and so I think that I want to be so successful that I keep just over booking myself to make sure that we're providing the support that we needed. And so I'm not taking care of myself the way I should in that respect.
We're not, in people in general, and we're not going to get too Freudian here, but people in general are just uncomfortable with mirrors when it comes to that sort of thing. Like, reflection's not easy for most folks, and the capacity for it is something that we've actively worked to try and cultivate that as a muscle in transitioning service members, because the capacity for reflection is kind of foundational for success in post-service. You got to be able to go into a job interview and talk about not necessarily a technical explanation of what you did on active duty, but a reflective conversation about how those skills translate into post-service world and the value in the workforce. But it's an uncomfortable thing, and we tend to do everything we can to not have to look in that mirror, and then all of a sudden you kind of crash right into it and you don't have a choice. And I think that's almost a common experience for anyone, and we've talked about how that seems to happen in about a 2-year cycle right after you get out of active duty, roughly 2 years, where you're kind of avoiding that at all costs, and then you can't, and then you're kind of forced to look at it and decide. You have that come to Jesus moment, like what am I going to do? Is it me? Is it them? How do I get past this? And then there's a couple folks that don't, right? And we see them too, and we try to do what we can to support them, but it's probably more common. It's a very common experience, I think, because we've had very similar experiences on transition. I suspect most people can feel like there's some familiarity in those in their own cases.
I think we're more the norm than not, for sure.
Yeah.
So, because we talked about how we're doing now as being successful in what we do, for you, when did that moment hit you that, like, this is working?
So that moment hit, I think, I had left higher education. I'd worked in higher education for about 11 years, and I had gotten, we'll call it, disenchanted with it. And I had left, and I was working as a mechanic, right, in a regional shop for U-Haul. And I got a call that the university was standing up a department. And it's something that I had myself fantasized about probably about 8 years prior to that, and thought, be great if the university had an office solely focused on helping military affiliated people do everything they need to do, because as everyone knows, services tend to be fragmented, and I always remembered having to take a whole day off of work to go stand in different lines, 5 or 6 different lines that were an hour or so long each, just to get set up for a semester. So I'd fantasized about that almost a decade prior, and then other things had happened in the meantime, and I'd left higher ed, and then I get this phone call that the university is going to stand up the department, and that's when I knew that this was a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity, and all the things I had said to myself at that point 15 years before, having that chance to do it better than everyone else could do it, that was it. That was the end. And at that point, some old habits kicked in, such as, failure is not an option. This is something that you're not going to get a shot at twice, so you're going to make it work. And I distinctly remember when we were setting up the office and the concept of the Center for Military Affiliated Students was put out there, and I was going to be the inaugural associate director for it. And what I was told, almost verbatim, was your future in higher education is going to be dictated by the success or failure of this experiment. And first of all, I took that as kind of what is this, like a threat or something like that? But then I realized I have absolutely no fear of that statement, because I am so hyper competitive, and this had been something I had ideated for, at that point, a decade and a half, that there was absolutely no way it wasn't going to be a success. I just wasn't going to allow it to not be a success. As long as I'm alive, this thing is going to be a success. So I was a little bit amused when I was kind of told or given that ultimatum, that I was essentially putting all my eggs in one basket. But I guess what they didn't realize is that this was a very well thought out basket. So so there's that. But I want to go back to another part of the question that you and I have avoided so far, which is
we're good at that.
Balancing family, right? Because again, we're not atypical veterans, and so what's that old cliche about vets? You're not truly a vet unless you've got chronic pain, bad credit, and at least one divorce.
Got all those.
Yeah. So, but navigating those at the same time, right? Because when I entered this journey, it was definitely with one setup that doesn't exist to this day. So, but there wasn't enough hours in the day, and I had not spent enough time working on myself and reflecting, and I wasn't that interested in cultivating interpersonal relationships with anybody. And so the toll that took on the familial side is that one marriage ended kind of right about the time that this started. So I think when did we stand this up? 2018. So yeah, it was right around the same time where, eventually if you're burning the candle at both ends and you're working 28 hours a day, something's going to give, and that's what gave. Probably needed to, because again, if we're going to go back to cliche mistakes that veterans make, I really don't recommend getting married when your age still has teen in it. Like, that's just not a good idea for a variety of reasons. That's a whole other episode. But again, when you have all these different complicated things at play that all require your full attention, and you can't do that, then there's going to be consequences. And for me, that's what that was. Is that had to be the thing that gave way so that I could continue doing these. And now it makes me sound like a terrible person, but it was going to happen anyway. It was just that was the first, I think, crack in the foundation, in the cement, where I had to really take a look at myself and say, what do I have the capacity to do? Am I doing the right thing? It was a period of intense reflection for me. And I think the result is I came out of that actually better equipped and better prepared to do what we're doing here today, because not only now can I talk to folks that are experiencing that or about to experience that, but it gave me a very good perspective on the importance, I think, of self-care, managing your time, devoting enough time to family. Because don't we tell, when we have young hard chargers come in and they're doing the same thing, and I want to come work for y'all, but I'm doing these 20 other things, and we sit them down and we say,
you're going to hit that wall.
Yeah, we're like, hey, maybe take stock of what you got going on, and realize that there are only 24 hours in a day, and you should spend some of those hours sleeping and taking care of yourself. So maybe come back in a year when you've balanced some of that out. But that's all a benefit of us having gone through those things, that I don't think we'd have that perspective if we hadn't.
Well, I think it gives us a level of authenticity. So when we are sitting down with veterans, that we can say, I understand what you're going through because I've been there.
Yeah.
Me, myself, I'm on my third marriage. Two of them ended because of the military. And that's actually an episode that we're going to talk about later. We actually have planned to talk about the family members' experience and stuff like that. But I'm fortunate now that my spouse is a veteran as well, so she knows what I was going through. Even if I didn't see it, she knows what I was going through. And I remember in 2017 complaining about how I didn't feel like we were getting supported as veterans, as student veterans. And I was like, somebody needs to do something about it. And my wife says, yeah, you do something about it. And that was kind of like me. That was that moment where it just clicked. I'm like, yeah, I am going to do something about it. And so I was fortunate that Lisa, Colonel Furman, hired me on as a student at the time.
From episode 1.
From episode 1, indeed. Well, I mean, she's the reason we're all here, because she brought us all together. We talk about it all the time. You say that she brought the dream team together.
Yep.
So she hired me on, and it's been, ever since, it's been almost life consuming, but in a good way. But I think for me, that my spouse pushing me to go, you need to be that support that you needed for other people, was kind of the catalyst for me to start down this road. But I think the moment fellow veteran who was in the military for a while, had some bad days while he was in, and was dealing with a lot of things from that. And really struggled as a student, and we worked with him quite a lot, setting up our program. And in fact, a lot of our programming here is because of the student. I won't say his name, but seeing him walk the stage with his service dog in a gown, that was the moment that I was like, this works.
Yep.
This matters. And I think that's the biggest part for me, was this matters. And it kind of cemented in my mind that we can do this. We are affecting lives in a very positive way, in a very holistic way. And that was a big thing for me. And I've kind of that's been my focus ever since.
That's the tough thing, though, is that, and I know we both run into this, but 3 times a week when I think about being overwhelmed and wanting to quit and kind of go back to what I defaulted to in my first couple of years off of active duty, something will happen, and I'll get reminded that this is real work. This is not going through the motions. This is impactful stuff that's having real impacts. And then I realize, like, I can't just walk away from it. But that's interesting, because then that makes me realize when Colonel Furman did what she did, where she built the team, she had that future in mind, where she knew that she wasn't going to see this through for 20 years. She knew she wanted to build something, but she wasn't going to hand it off until she was comfortable with whose hands it was in. So she assembled the team that she wanted, and then when she felt like we were able to handle it, she then moved on to the next thing. And now I completely get that, because it's real easy sometimes to think, oh, this sucks, or the bureaucracy is bad, or I'm frustrated, and so I don't need to be dealing with this. I could be doing nothing and enjoying that, and then realizing, but then who's going to take care of these 6,300 people?
Well, she trusted us, so I got to question her judgment at times. But
that's true.
But no, I mean, you and I've had this conversation. A lot of late nights. We're here 7, 8 o'clock at night, and I've probably quit 20 times in the time that I've been here. But I always say that if I'm not here, then who's going to do it?
Right.
So that's kind of kept me going.
Well, and that closes the loop, right? This is why we say, do as we say, not as we do. Right? Don't do it the way we're doing it, because we're still not great at self-care. We're still not getting enough sleep. We still have plenty of issues of our own that we're ignoring. But
to be fair, we're moving the needle. I know when we first started this, neither of us were doing the things that we're supposed to be doing. But now we're seeing the effects of it, because we kept telling other veterans, like, you need to go do these things. And then I'll speak for myself here. I knew I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing, but I kept telling everybody else to go to therapy, go to the VA, file your claims, do all these things. And I kind of felt like a hypocrite that I wasn't doing what I was telling other people to do.
Well, that's how I got into VA health in the first place, is being in a position to advise people to do that, and not having done it myself. So I got into it, and we won't go too far into detail, but that was a decision. It was a life-changing decision for me that probably allows me to still be here doing what I'm doing, because my health was not where it should have been. And it was a simple matter of, I don't want to feel like a hypocrite, so I'm going to enroll in VA healthcare, and that saved my life.
That is the only reason I went back and filed my claim, is because I felt like a hypocrite because I was helping other people and I wasn't doing it myself. And so same reason I started going to therapy, which is probably the best thing I ever could have done for me as a husband, as a father, as a supervisor, as a human being, was starting to do the things I needed to do to be healthy.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think
you already answered that question, and it's a one-sentence answer. And it's what we refer to as our purpose statement. So the way we support military affiliated students is by striving to provide the level of support for them that we wanted for ourselves coming up. And that is just an all-encompassing statement, and that's true no matter what the task is. And we thought of that because it's not just what maybe some folks consider to be important stuff, the money transactions, but like any activity that we're doing, events, programming, case management, shredding documents, whatever the task is, it's all with an eye towards providing that level of support that we wanted to see when we were on the other side of the counter, but we didn't get.
I think it goes deeper than that too. I think that for us, what we do in our roles is not, we don't provide the support we wanted. We provide the support we needed.
Yeah.
And I think there is a difference, because I think that it's very easy for me as a veteran to show up here and go, I want people to do all these things, but what I needed was somebody to say, maybe you're the problem. And so I think that our approach is different, because we provide support, but we also provide accountability. We provide conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable. For us and for the person hearing it, but those are things that needed to be heard. I remember a few years ago we had a student that I had tried to help for a couple semesters. I was like, go do all these things, go to Student Disability Services, go do all this stuff. We've created all these partnerships. You should reach out to them and seek out their support. And he came into my office and he goes, Will, I've been kicked out of school. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm a veteran. I said, I don't think that's true. And I asked, I said, did you go to Student Disability Services? Did you do all these things that we talked about? And he goes, no. And I said, well, then your problems aren't veteran problems. Your problems are you problems.
Yeah.
And so he and I had a very candid conversation for about 40 minutes about those things, about him not doing what he needed to do to succeed. And at the end of the conversation, I remember he goes, I needed to hear that. And a year later, he was back in school, graduated, and now he's moved on to bigger, better things. But I think sometimes we need somebody that's been there to be like, hey, maybe it's you, maybe it's not the world.
Yeah. Well, and another dimension of that is, of course, there's that kind of direct engagement component where we're directly supporting the military-connected student themselves. But then there's all the behind-the-scenes stuff, too. So policy, right? Sometimes policies aren't friendly to folks in that particular situation. And so even something that we're working on now, where we're intending to change the military activation policy from only covering the person under orders to saying anybody affected by an activation, because it could disrupt things for the entire family. And then when those questions come up, it's not an easy answer, and it should be. But that's one of the things that we also do is what are the systemic issues, what are the barriers, what policies exist that either help or hurt, and how can we fix that? Advocacy, that's another one. That's kind of what you were talking about there, I think, when you were trying to advise this person about what you need to do. That's a form of advocacy, but a lot of these vets are self-aware, and that they come to us and they say, hey, I disagree with this grade that I got from my professor, and I want to dispute it, but I don't know how to do that without coming across as hyper-aggressive and knife-handing and using the F word as a comma. So can you help me kind of articulate this point to my professor so that I can, get to what I'm trying to get at, which is talking about the grade and not having my message lost in the noise of how I deliver that. And so we get that a lot. I know you get that a lot. I get that a lot. Sometimes it's just helping navigate figuring out who is who, because when you're on active duty, everyone's got their rank on, so you know who the company commander is, and the platoon commander, and the battalion commander, and the first sergeant, and the sergeant major. Out here, when someone tells you you need to get this signed by the department chair and assistant dean, what does that look like? Who is that? I don't even understand what those things are.
Or like we say all the time, there's a chancellor, like it's Star
Right,
Wars.
yeah.
I don't know what a chancellor is or what they do.
Yep. I don't know. Palpatine runs the thing. I don't get it, but having to have that level of kind of individual, and I hesitate to say case management because it's not case management, but it's advocacy, where we're essentially guiding the service member, former service member, the veteran, in a way that teaches them how to fish versus giving them the fish. So I'm not going to go have this conversation for you, but I will be your advocate in coaching you in how to have that conversation yourself.
We give advice and create opportunities. And so we could sit here all day long and talk about the actual job descriptions we have, but nobody cares about that. They want to know what we actually do.
Right.
And I think one of the things that we do well is we've always been very intentional to listen to the students and make sure that everything we do is reflective of them, and not say, well, this is what I need, therefore every veteran needs this.
Yeah, vetsplaining. Yeah, no, but I think to get to the kind of the foundation of answering the question, which by the way, the question was how do we support military connected students, is something that we do very uniquely. And I say we because yes, we do it, but it actually came from you and your idea very early on with starting Coffee with Vets years ago. And that idea being that when you look around the environment and you see efforts to build community, they're usually built around an initiative. So there's a grant that says, we're going to help veterans transition or learn cyber or something like that. And then that initiative then, in order to get buy-in and get participation, there's this campaign to build community around it and build trust in it and get participation in it. And at that point, when we look around, when you and I looked at that, we're thinking we're already 6 months behind if we're waiting for each initiative, and we don't necessarily have that kind of time to get something rolling to prove success or not. And so the idea that you had behind Coffee with Vets was vets just need community sometimes and not around any kind of initiative. And so I guess technically the initiative was Coffee with Vets, but really it's just an excuse. And for a lot of vets, they'll even tell us, and they've told us, and I heard that at the most recent Coffee with Vets, hey, this is the only time that I actually like shower, put on pants, and leave my house to go talk to other humans when the sun's up. And that's why that event is so well attended all 12 months, even when school's not in session. But I think the point I'm getting to is the biggest single thing that we do to support military connected students is provide community. We provide a community, a space for those interactions to happen where people can see each other, talk to each other, and then we can introduce things to it, like bringing in Vital and VSOC. And when maybe they've had this preconceived notion in their heads about, I don't want to do the VA because all of my friends have said the VA is terrible and I had bad experiences. But when you're having this very casual engagement and you're seeing that it's a human being, that it's that your VSOC counselor is a person who cares and is very much in a position to help you, then as the veteran or even the family member, you're much more open to engaging with that particular resource to help yourself, and then not run into some of those barriers they're going to force you to stop out of school or interrupt your life. But I think that it can't be overstated that the single biggest thing that you and I both do, more you than me at this point, is build and maintain a space for that community to exist, so that veterans can authentically be themselves, but also allowing us to introduce the things that we need to without, as you mentioned a couple minutes ago, without it coming across as vetsplaining. Yeah, it was definitely not a natural progression because like a lot of guys that are infantry, when I got out, I'm going to go into criminal justice. That's what my associate's and bachelor's degrees are in criminal justice. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that absolutely was not what I wanted to do. And then I just kind of happened into higher ed. It was, I got tired of working corporate, and so there was an opportunity to work at a university, and so I took that. And I think that there was a nexus between just working in that environment, but also the struggles I had starting as a student, and then I won't say that I had it all figured out. I would say that's when I was able to write the problem statement from both perspectives. I'm in it, so this is what I see from the inside. I'm a student, so here's the struggles I'm seeing from that side. And what I concluded, my problem statement, is that there was not adequate representation of veterans in higher education. And so it wasn't necessarily that higher ed was intentionally doing these things to put up barriers or to stop us. It was that nobody there knew. There was nobody there advocating for us or adding our perspective when policy or anything was being talked about. And so that's when it kind of locked in for me that I needed to adjust my path, and I needed to move into that space and fill that void in higher ed. And so it was right after I had finished, actually, it was almost a year before I had finished my criminal justice degree, that I had applied for a master's in higher education administration, because that's when I had already decided, all right, I need to be that guy. So the career progression for me was less of a natural kind of like, all right, well, you did these things on active duty and you have this transferable skill set, so why not apply it in higher education, to identifying a gap, internally writing a problem statement, and then deciding that I was going to do everything I could to try and resolve that issue. Now, I will say that it was eye-opening, right, to make that decision, because it's not as simple as, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and then you start just making movements to do it. It starts with, like I said, kind of ideating. These things don't exist. How can I turn the Titanic, and affect some of the sea change that can lead to the things that I think need to happen? And that I think is what I struggled with a little bit, and what most people probably struggle with, is that I was not going to get instant gratification. So just moving into this as a career or getting a degree in this, that by itself wasn't going to do anything. Those were the opening shots, and that it was going to be a very long journey, because you and I always joke about the speed of higher ed, but at that point, understanding it because I was working in it and knowing what that meant, I knew that what I was committing to was not we're going to get this done in 1 year or 18 months. This was I don't know what the end date on this is. All I know is that I have this defined objective, and it was still fuzzy about what I want to do. And so I need to make a whole career move and dedicate it to that. And I think that's why it's appropriate to call it a career move, because I knew it wasn't going to be a task to be performed in a defined period of time. It was going to be something that could, at that time, possibly take the entire rest of my career to see those things happen, and to change the culture of higher education to where there was veteran representation and leadership and veteran perspectives when discussing things like policy and programming. So no, not a natural progression at all, more or less. I guess being one of the lucky ones that fell into a sense of purpose, and being able to throw everything behind it. And so the career consideration was secondary to the objective, if that makes sense.
At least when you tell your story, like, it seems like intentional, like you sat down and thought about it, and like, this is what I can do to affect change. And I remember walking on campus and just being angry and not knowing what to do, and confused and scared, to be fair, because this was new, this was big. And, we talked about this earlier in the episode, like a lot of things that we do as veterans to avoid things. I showed up to campus because I said, I want to come up here and learn where my classes are before the students showed up.
Recon.
And exactly, I was recon. I can go this path to get here to here and avoid as much people as possible. And I just happened to luck into Micah, my predecessor. And so they were there and had some VMA stuff out. And so I just stopped and chatted with him, because he's a Marine, so he's wearing a Marine pin. So I knew he was a fellow veteran. Mm-hmm. And so we just started chatting. And he goes, "You're doing all that. Why don't you come do that for us?" And I was like, "What do you mean, come do it for you?" And he's like, "Well, we have a part-time position and opening up. I want you to come interview for it." And I never in a million years thought, oh, I want to be in higher ed. Mm-hmm. I just knew what I didn't want. And so for me, it wasn't an intentional choice. I just lucked into running into Micah, trying to avoid people, and then finding my people. And he offered me an opportunity to come and interview. And I remember one of the things that stuck out about the interview, two things actually. One, my beard was down to here, and I shaved it off for the interview. And I remember Lisa telling me, "Don't ever shave again after the interview." But the other thing that stuck out was when they interviewed me, they said, "Why you?" That was the question.
Yep.
Why should we pick you for this job? And I said, "I don't know that you should." And they said, "Well, that's an interesting answer." And I said, "Here's my refutation of that." I said, I've pushed cows and slung hammers my entire life outside of the military where I did logistics. I don't know how to do this job.
Mm-hmm.
I know nothing about higher ed. I know nothing about what you guys do here. But what I do know is my experience. And I said, so if you hire me, what I'll bring to the table is authenticity from all the mistakes that I made, but also I am new to this. And so I'm eager to learn because of how passionate I am about helping other veterans. So you'll kind of get to, for lack of a better thing, mold me to be the person that you want, because I've never done anything like this before. Like I said, this is so much different than rounding up cattle and putting roofs on houses. And so I never little different. But I never thought that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah, I don't know anyway. I've never heard a story where someone, like when you ask a third grader, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they're like, a higher ed administrator. But
I wanted to be a cowboy. I never said working in school.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because we kind of talked about this earlier in the episode that, showing up here, I didn't know anything about higher ed. And so as I got here and I started out part-time as a student, I was learning how higher ed worked.
Yeah.
How we needed to talk to other people, how we needed to approach things. And so I learned a lot about the inner machinations of the environment that we're in. And I remember being an SVA officer as a student going, if I was in charge, this is all the things that I would do. And then when I started working for the university, I'm like, that's not how any of this works.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was so like ambitious and full of fire and all the things I wanted to do. But, this is something we talk about all the time. I wanted immediate change. And now that I'm on this side of the fence, I'm seeing that change needs to be subtle. It needs to be sustainable.
Yep.
And I think that's what we've done well here, is that we have brought on that subtle, sustainable change. And so we've made systemic change because of it, not all fire and brimstone, but something that'll hopefully last longer than any of us being here.
Yeah, it's like being on a diet, although I know y'all are asking, what does he know about dieting? But
I know how not to do it.
Right. Yeah, and that's the point, is that crash diet and you do it extreme and you lose a whole bunch of weight really fast. It's not sustainable. I also wanted to throw in something about the importance of mentorship, and I think that's something that both you and I have benefited from over the years. And for me, it started when I was in the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies department, and it was complete and absolute luck that I was working in a department full of faculty members that had real-world leadership experience, either as school administrators, university administrators, some school superintendents, but folks that had a history of doing before they came to become teaching the next generation. And so I had this access to this entire 20-member faculty of just leaders and mentors. And a lot of the lessons that I learned early on in higher ed came from them. So like when David Thompson took a chance on hiring this Marine who had only been working night shifts and security and bank details and things like that, when he brought me in and said, I think you've got the parts that are going to make this work, and then cultivated me over the next 6 years. And then Bruce Barnett, who taught me the importance of having the capacity for reflection. I was not a reflective person. I didn't really have that as a skill. It wasn't in my toolkit. But being under his mentorship for 3 years really kind of affected my outlook on that, and made me realize this is something that I need to be able to do if I'm going to be effective in doing anything for anybody else. And then another faculty member, Michael Jennings, who one day happened upon me as I was angrily banging out an email, like angrily hitting the keys because I was going to dispute a grade because I believed that I should have gotten a higher grade because I read the instructions and the professor, you wrote them wrong. And he sat there and he explained to me, he says, look, if you want to get what you want, you can't approach people that way. You have to, first of all, take ownership of, hey, I'm sorry that I misinterpreted this, but now that I understand, if you give me another opportunity to give you what it is you actually wanted from me, I'd appreciate that. And then, of course, it worked, right? I got the extension, the extra week to do the assignment, and I got the higher grade on it. And but all these little opportunities for mentorship. Mentorship isn't necessarily you have a mentor that you're meeting with almost like a therapist regularly, and they're guiding you through things. Certainly, that's a form of mentorship, but being open to being mentored at every opportunity. And I think that's something that, again, when we've talked about the challenge of transition in the first couple of years, when I myself was not open to anything, which is why I was trying to avoid the entire world, and I wasn't open, that wasn't the right time for me to receive that. But the benefit of getting to a point where I could receive that kind of mentorship and then internalizing it and thinking of it not just reflectively but reflexively, is essential, or was essential, in getting me to where I am today, which is being able to provide this support for other people.
Well, I think that's important, that as we talk about these topics, that it's one thing to go in and listen, and I use this analogy all the time about the whole white men can't jump thing, where they're in the car and he's like, you listen to Jimmy, but you don't hear Jimmy. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give veterans, is that you have to be open to hearing the mentor and listening to them, because it's not enough to just randomly meet people and things like that. If you're not willing to literally just take in what they're telling you and internalize it and want that mentorship, then it's not going to be effective.
Right.
And I think that's me, younger me, was not willing to be the recipient of mentorship, which I probably would have benefited from. I just wasn't willing to hear it.
Yep.
And when I hit my rock bottom, and I talk about this a lot, that I ended up homeless, and I was arrested several times because I was making bad choices. There were people out there that was telling me what I needed to do, but I wasn't willing to be reciprocal of that relationship from those mentors. And that's one of the things that really changed things around for me. Even being here in my job, I don't have a degree. But what I think I do well is I'm willing to listen to other people and allow myself to be that mentee. And I've been able to internalize those things and use it to be effective in what I do.
And on the other end of that spectrum, the whole reason I got a doctorate, I didn't intend to. And Lisa, Colonel Furman, sat me down very candidly, as she tends to be, and said, she pointed to her shoulder and said, I've got the Eagles on my shoulder, and I've got 30 years experience that gives me the clout to do this job. You don't have either of those things. So if you have any hope of being effective in a role where you're advocating for and supporting and doing all these things for military connected students, you've got to figure out how to get that. And so then, as I always tell the story, so that she kind of pushed me back into school, where I thought, okay, great. She got on my doctoral committee, and I was thinking, I got to ring her, right? This is going to be a little bit easier. And then it turned out she was absolutely the worst. She pushed me the hardest, and was the most challenging person on that entire committee. But again, that was her mentoring me to get me where she knew where I wanted to be. But she also knew what I needed to achieve that, even if I didn't. And so that being another form of mentorship, and then having me achieve that, helping me achieve that. And she was absolutely right. She was 100% right that unfortunately we live in a very credentialed society where if I didn't have that, then I don't know that I or we, by association, would be taken seriously enough to affect the change that we've been wanting to do. But going back to your point about the utility of a college degree, the conversations I've had around that is, you need the right tool for the right job, and that's true anywhere. That's true with, if you're working on a car, it's true if you're dealing with people. And so college degrees are nice, and of course I've used mine as a tool, right, to do some of the things that we want to do in our roles. But anytime I've ever been challenged about you being in your role and having the leadership role that you do, my answer is always the same. If you can bring me someone who can do it better than he can with a degree, we'll have a conversation. But until then, I have other things to do, so please exit.
To be fair, my GI Bill expired because I'm that old that I have mine is like, yeah, well, you had 15 years.
Yeah.
Best of luck to you.
Yep.
But yeah, you keep pushing me to go back,
But
and I definitely intend to.
there's multiple types of knowledge and education. A college degree is one type, but it's not the only type. And I think sometimes people just forget that or lose sight of that or just don't understand that, and they get hyper fixated on, that is the credential, and that is not the only credential. There's a lot of wisdom out there. I think about my grandma, right? There's a lot of wisdom out there that has nothing to do with having sat in a classroom for 120 semester credit hours that we could all benefit from. So it's just important as we talk about perspective and focus to understand that there are, if we're going to advocate for veterans and their infinite diversity, because if you've met one vet, you've met one vet, and having to stretch ourselves to kind of meet them where they are, we have to do that for ourselves too. And so as a leader managing this department, I have to apply the exact same principle, which is I have to look at all kinds of knowledge, all kinds of wisdom, and essentially deploy the best tool for the best job. And sometimes that's not necessarily that piece of paper.
Sometimes you need a hammer.
Yeah.
But that brings up another point, is we're talking about mentorship.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that we talk about, and you and I have talked about this endlessly, is that as veterans we don't always sell ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing you and I talked
Right.
about. And as I go in, and I do have to say I don't have a degree, but what I have been able to do is cultivate selling myself, taking credit for the things that I do, and how I can advocate for myself that, yes, I might be missing these things, but here's all the things I do bring to the table. And I think as veterans, that's something that we often struggle with, that because we go through TAPS, and then they're like, this is, just tell them how much equipment that you dealt with.
Yeah.
Put a big dollar amount on it, and just tell people you had $60 million worth of equipment, but we're not actually selling ourselves on the skills that we're bringing from doing those things. So as we're talking about mentorship, that's one of the best pieces of advice that you've ever given me, and that I could in turn give to somebody else, is don't just look at what's on the paper. How are you going to take credit for the things that you've done, the things that you've accomplished, and show a potential employer, after you graduate, this is why you should hire me.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I think that you also brought up another point as well about being challenged. And I think that that's one of the things that's really went into the success of what we do here, is that we've had the psychological safety that's allowed ourselves to be challenged without becoming defensive.
Right.
And you've done it to me, and I feel like I've done it to you at times, where we do challenge each other, and we're secure enough in our roles and who we are, is to go, maybe you're right, and maybe we do need to try this other way, without it feeling like you're challenged as a man, as a human.
Well, it's always attack the process, not the person.
Right.
And that's actually, it's interesting how that's baked into military culture, because when you think about Top Gun students and how part of the process of going through Top Gun is planning a mission, and then as the student, when you've planned the mission, you go through the murder board process, which is essentially the Socratic method, because all the instructor's job is to challenge every single thing that you've put into that mission plan. Whether or not they agree with it isn't the point. It's to force you to be able to essentially defend it. Why this? Why did you choose this? Why are we doing it this way? But not to challenge your ability to do it, just making sure that you have thought as thoroughly as you possibly can about how to do something. And then if you have an answer for it, then usually in Top Gun, not that I've been to Top Gun, but I have a book.
I watched a movie.
Yeah, I watched two of them. But when you get challenged as the student and you're going through the murder board process, all they're looking for is that you have an answer. If you have an answer, then they'll just say, okay, cool, proceed. If you don't have an answer, well, then that's a whole other kind of conversation.
But we've had to do that a lot in our roles here, as we've set up the center and supported veterans, and we say we need this for our students, and they're like, why? We already have this other thing. Why don't they just go to that? And so we've had to be secure enough to be challenged and say, well, this is why. And then we usually have a fairly articulate counter proposal to say this is why. Like Coffee with Vets. Why are veterans not going to these other things? Well, these are their needs and why they need to do this particular thing to be able to support this population. So.
Okay. So, I don't know. Have we said useful things today?
I hope so. If not, we've talked a lot about nothing. We made ourselves feel better, if nothing else.
Right, yeah. Well, I guess that means how many ever views we get, that's how many therapists we got, because we'll see what happens in the comments. But
I hope no therapists are watching this because they might be like, we need to talk to that guy.
we may be the first to get like not product sponsorship, but therapist sponsorship, where we have like a mental health clinic saying,
BetterHelp, we're looking at you.
yeah.
So what I hope that anybody that's watching this will take away from this is that hopefully we can normalize certain things, that we can hopefully show that if you're a veteran or family member that's watching this, that you're not the only person going through these things. And hopefully, as we've said several times throughout the podcast, that we can offer the wisdom of our experience. And, like I said, I've made a lot of mistakes, so hopefully I can give some advice so people don't do the same things that I did and they can be better than me.
And if you're sitting there and you're watching this and you're thinking, this isn't me, they don't know me, this is not my situation, we all thought that too. We actually said I've said those things, and I promise you it is relevant to you.
If you're saying that, then you're our audience.
You're who we're talking to. So.